Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We're here for another show about .NET and ASP.NET in particular. We're gonna cover a bunch of things tonight. So we'll look at the new ASP.NET Core hosting model, the minimal hosting model as it's sometimes called, because it's supposedly simplified. We'll see the pros and cons of using it. I've done a bunch of investigation before this stream to work out some pros and cons, and raised GitHub issues and all kinds of things, and tweeted even David Fowler and Damien as well to get some of their responses on it. And we'll also look at HTTP 3 really briefly. I don't think it's prime time yet, but we'll have a look at it anyway. And then we will also, I have a bit of an update on the system.text.json source generators that we looked at in a previous stream. So let's get started. I'll switch over to my desktop and we'll start off just with the source generators update. So I had this source code that I put together for that stream. I've since updated it a little bit now with a new benchmark to, this is basically, okay, so I had a web application here. It was just an API. If I fire this up, where's the start project? There we go, hit F5. What I ended up doing, I'm in release mode. Stop debugging. We'll go back to debug mode, hit F5. What I ended up doing to this project since the last stream was I added two endpoints to it. One is a fast endpoint and one is a slow endpoint. And the reason why this one is slow is this one doesn't use system.text.json source generators, and the top one, the fast one, does. So you can see the content is exactly the same. It's just I have a different model here, and one of the models here, the models are exactly the same, but one of them is using the JSON serializer context, this one over here, while the other one isn't. So I've registered that in the in the startup using JSON serialization options, add context. So when I ran this benchmark to compare the two, I discovered that, okay, last stream when we ran the benchmark, we discovered that there was a 40% performance increase, up to 40%. I found 30%, but in some of the .NET benchmarks in their blog, they say 40%. But you know, obviously I've got different JSON data, so it could go up and down. In this benchmark, I'm running a full ASP.NET application in memory using Web Application Factory over here. So I fire up a new Web Application Factory that starts up the whole application in memory, and then I create a HTTP client in my benchmark, and I make a call to either the slow endpoint or the fast endpoint. And I discovered after this that when you factor in all of the other stuff happening in an ASP.NET Core application, you end up with a kind of a 0.1%, a 10% performance improvement. So it's a lot less when you consider the whole application. I thought that was interesting. And then another thing I discovered, and I'll show it to you right now. So if I copy and paste this and go slow, and we just create a serializer context for both the fast and the slow types here. So weather forecast slow, and we'll just rename that as well. It turns out when I thought to do this, I thought I'd create this and I'd add two contexts. If I hit F5 now though, Watch what happens. Invalid operation exception. The specified JSON serializer options instance is already bound with a JSON serializer context instance. So what I discovered there was you can only add one of these contexts, which is super interesting. So that means you can't do this. So we'll delete that file. If you want to add multiple types, you have to add it to a single context. So this just becomes, I don't know, custom something, custom JSON serializer context rather than a weather forecast one. And now if I hit F5, both of those types, it's the application started, and both of those types are now have the system.text.json source generators code being generated for them. So that was super interesting. Just a quick update there on system.text.json. Let's jump on to the main topic for today's stream though. So we were gonna continue looking at our .NET 6 improvements mega thread. These are all this kind of secret sauce little tidbits here and there that I've picked up over the last year or so. Some improvements that have come into .NET and ASP.NET. So we've covered most of it now, checked off most of the items. We have a few left over. Maybe we'll cover OpenTelemetry next week. That's quite a large topic. We're going to look at HTTP 3 today. And we'll start off though looking at the new minimal hosting APIs. And if you don't know what the new minimal hosting APIs are all about, I created a blank project over here using .NET 6. This is just a blank API project earlier on. And this is what the new minimal hosting APIs is all about. This particular file, Program.cs, where it's pretty much blank now. But these are the APIs I'm talking about, WebApplication.CreateBuilder. If I bring up the old .NET 5 version of this class and put that side by side, you can see, okay, ignore the fact that the namespace is missing and we're missing the class and we're missing some namespaces. That's just like some C#10 features that have popped in there, but we could bring those back. That's not a problem. You could totally just plug those back in, and I think the namespace is new. And then we also need a program.main, public void main, static. So we can plug that in, and we can stick our args in here, and that's effectively equivalent now. But oh, the namespaces have gone missing. That's just because this has got implicit usings enabled. We've covered that in a previous stream also. But the core thing I want to talk about is these APIs here. So in the past, you had to have this super secret name over here as a convention, create HostBuilder, and this was required if you wanted to use Entity Framework or if you wanted to have integration tests using Web Application Factory and calling your API to test it in memory. So that was like a hidden thing that's gone away now. So that's a positive. We've also got lost. Well, we haven't lost. We still have these APIs. The ones shown here on the .NET 5 project. In .NET 6, you can continue to use them. So if I was to just copy and paste this, comment out that code, this would still work, except that I don't have a startup class, so I'd have to copy and paste that across as well. But you can see there's no other compiler errors. However, why did the .NET ASP.NET team go to such trouble to migrate from this generic host over to this new ASP.NET specific web application host, so-called minimal APIs. Well, that's a very big topic, and there's some resources that I've read that are worth looking into. The first is Andrew Locke. He has a giant blog series on this subject. It's well worth reading into. So do take a look at Andrew Locke's website. You can find him at andrewlocke.net. Another resource I found was Sean Wildermuth. His Structuring Minimal APIs, a First Draft. Do subscribe to his channel. He's got like a bunch of subscribers already. I found his resource quite thoughtful and useful. So he kind of looks at this process, this minimal API, and he kind of structures it in a way where he'd be happy with it. So for example, if he was gonna add some stuff to services, he'd want a function over here, public void configure services. He goes through this process where he moves some code around. Oh, does he do it? Oh, he did it. I should roll back a little bit. Go back to this model. Static void configure services, iService collection services. He does this and he passes in the builder.services, and he moves this code over here in here. And in a typical ASP.NET application, you're not going to have one line of code here. This is a very empty project. This configure services often gets very large. If I go over to an API template that has a bunch of stuff configured using the old .NET 5 system, ignore the if-defs. This is a project template, but you can see that there's a bunch of stuff going on here. I'm setting up Swagger. I'm setting up like API versioning, controllers, response caching, and all the rest of it, health checks and everything. So that can get quite large. So he moves that code in here, and you can probably simplify this even further because you can use a fluent syntax with this iService collection and just kind of chain stuff. So for example, if I wanted to, I don't know, add something else, add some JSON options, and then do something with the JSON options, you could do that. You can chain that as much as you want. He then went on to add another function, void, what was it called in the old system? Configure iApplication.Builder, application, and then we've got application dot, and then pretty much what's in here. So we can get rid of app. I'm not a fan of using short words. I think it just, you know, characters are cheap. You can type them. It's not a problem. Why is it complaining? Map controllers. Oh, I think we have to use endpoints. Use routing. I think that has to go before use authorization. That goes afterwards. And then there's like a whole thing where use endpoints. X.map map controllers. There we go. Love that thing filling in for me. And then you can just stick app in there. So he went through this process where he simplified some of the code, moved some stuff around. He went a bit further as well. You can definitely go check Sean Wildermuth's video for that. And this, if you look at it, looks a lot like the startup class in the old .NET 5 world. So we'll put the .NET 5 world over here on this side. And you've got configure services and configure. And it's now just kind of merged into one giant application. Okay, we've just kind of moved the cheese around a little bit, but where's the benefit? What's the purpose of this? And that's what we're going to cover today. I think I was a bit confused also. I didn't know what was going on. Why are we having to do all this? So here are some of the benefits that I've discovered. So the first one is really explained well by Andrew Locke's first blog post, looking inside Configuration Manager. Now, Configuration Manager is a type that we get only in this new minimal API and not in the old API. So if I go to builder.configuration, you can see that the type there is Configuration Manager. Now, this is a brand new type. And the advantage of using this as opposed to the old system is that you often want to add different layers in your configuration. So for example, I'll go back to a giant project over here that does a bit more, and we'll talk about that. So here's the old .NET 5 configuration builder, and here I'm adding a bunch of things. So I'm adding an app-settings.json file, an app-settings.development or test or production.json file, adding a keeper file. So this is useful if you want to load configuration from disk, particularly in Docker or Kubernetes environments. That's super useful. You can load secrets from disk. And then we're adding user secrets if we're in the development environment. We're adding environment variables, application insights, and stuff from the command line. So you can do all this. The issue with this is, with the old configuration builder, is you often needed to come in here and you would add, well, I think Andrew Locke's blog explains it really well. Here it is. So we're adding a JSON file, we're adding environment variables. Then if it's production, we want to pull out the key vault name from probably one of these two sources, the JSON file and environment variables. Then we want to plug that into an Azure Key Vault provider, and then kind of reload the configuration. But we're having to call build here on the configuration so that we can pull out the key vault name. So it's like a chicken and egg situation. And the new configuration manager API, this guy, configuration manager, resolves that issue, and we get much quicker and more efficient reloading of configuration every time you add or remove something from there. So that's in terms of API or functionality, that's, as far as I can work out, the only major piece of new positive functionality that has made a serious improvement. What else did I discover? Another thing I discovered is that, okay, so in the old generic host world, we had Host.CreateDefaultBuilder. This came from Microsoft.extensions.hosting. So that was nothing to do with ASP.NET. You could use that for non-ASP.NET applications. In fact, if you go to File, New Project, and go to search for worker service, new, we'll just create that new project. We'll create that as a .NET 5.1. Oh, did I not rename that? Yes, save. Oops, I think instead of adding a new project, I got rid of my old one. So that also uses this, but notice that it's using configure services here, and it's not using configure web defaults, which we were using in the old project. So if we go back and go back here. So here we're using configure web host defaults. So this guy sets up a bunch of secret source in ASP.NET. Some of that is things like setting up kestrels, setting up developer exception page middleware, host filtering middleware, setting up the forwarded headers middleware, enabling IIS integration, a bunch of stuff. And it sets up some open telemetry in .NET 6 as well. So that it's very hidden, it's very secret source. I never really liked it, and I didn't use it. And then we use startup as well. So in the start, if we go to the startup, this is where you hook up controllers, and then in the configure method, you can set up your developer exception page, routing, authorization, endpoints, and all the rest of it. In the new world, you only get one function. You don't get the two, because this is not Microsoft Extensions hosting. This is ASP.NET specific. So you don't use Host.CreateDefaultBuilder anymore. You use this thing, you pass in your arguments, your command line arguments, pass to your application, and that's it. You can pass in some options, web application options, new web application options. Let's have a look what's in there. You can pass in args, the environment name, the application name, and the content root path. Very, very simple options. Nothing really to it. Now, in the new world, all of these defaults that were happening in configure web host defaults have moved into here, and they've been combined with CreateDefaultBuilder. So you end up with a single line of code instead of 2 lines of code. And also, use startup is gone. So you end up with this builder object, and this contains absolutely everything you need to start your application. The configuration manager, your service collection, your logging builder, your host, and web host. So the host is the Microsoft Extensions, this guy, Microsoft Extensions hosting HostBuilder. So that's what that is. The web host is the ASP.NET specific web host. So this is like the ASP.NET bits sprinkled on top of the Microsoft Extensions host. So you get everything in this builder object, and everything comes off that. So you configure it. When you're ready, you build it. You get your application, and then you can configure the application and then hit run. And that's your application. That's that. There is a wrinkle here. So it's not all roses, a bed of roses. So I actually asked a question to Damien Edwards and David Fowler as well. So if I scroll back down somewhere and find that thread, and you can see here. So I asked David Fowler and Damien Edwards, the templates use the new model, so it will become the default. So the new model, when you create a new project now, this is what's created for you. Not my code that I've added here, but you get the idea. The new model combines the Program.cs and the start. That can get pretty big for larger apps. The danger is that you end up with spaghetti code. So that's not necessarily for someone like myself who knows what they're doing with ASP.NET and has done it loads of times. But for a new developer, you could end up with quite large kind of spaghetti code all over the place, especially given that you just have the one file without any namespaces or anything. So that's a danger, but with great power comes great responsibility for us developers. So I hadn't made up my mind yet at this point about which model to use, the old one or the new one, because the old one hasn't gone away, by the way. The response I got from Damien Edwards was, do what makes you happy, but I far prefer the new model. So he's obviously preferring the new one. I don't see how that's different to startup today. Spaghetti in 2 methods instead of 1. Same techniques apply. Add methods, classes, functions to logically split things up. So he's basically saying, you can use methods and classes and clean it up a bit like I've just shown over here. So that's all good. So it seems like this is the preferred way from the ASP.NET team. Otherwise, why would they have built it right? It must be the preferred way. They must have thought there was something positive in this model. So my next question was, when I tried to use this in the old world, instead of accepting all these defaults, you used to be able to come here and say new host builder. And then I could go and do whatever I wanted from scratch. So I could come here and I could say configure logging. And I could configure logging from scratch the way I want, rather than accepting the defaults, which configures, I think, console logging and ETW logging by default for me. So I could just throw away all those defaults and start again. And in fact, in my .NET Box templates, I do that. So if I scroll up here, I create a new host builder, and then I set my own defaults from scratch. So I configure the root of the application, the host configuration, configure the application, set up all the app configuration. I use Serilog instead of Microsoft.extensions.logging because I think it's better. Set up the default service provider so that it's validating things on build and at first runtime, as opposed to and even on build as opposed to at runtime. We configure the web host and all the rest of it. Now, how do we do that in the new world? I found no way to do it. So I thought, okay, maybe there's another method here. Nope, there wasn't anything. There is, what is this WebApplication.CreateBuilder? I hadn't seen that before. With pre-configured defaults, create builder. That creates a web application. This creates a web application builder. So that's just an even more shortcut way, even shorter way of skipping all of this stuff and just going straight to an application. Yeah. I wonder what's in there. Like, why would anyone want to do that? That seems a bit strange to me. Anyway, I hadn't spotted that before. But then I thought, okay, maybe I can new web application builder. And it turns out you can't do that because this guy has a private constructor. If I can actually, I can't even go to definition on it. Control click, doesn't seem to work. So there's an internal constructor. I can't call that. I can't mess around with this. So in this constructor, there's a whole bunch of defaults being set. And unfortunately, that's closed off to us. So there's no way to get to not use the defaults and to start to create your own defaults. You might want to do that for a larger application. You might want to do that if you're building lots of APIs and you want to share code between those different API applications. You might want to just kind of create some defaults in a class library and share those between applications. Lots of reasons to want to do this. So I raised a GitHub issue, provide a way to customize web application builder defaults. That was closed because it was a duplicate of something that David Fowler had already been looking into. And so he's suggesting a couple of different APIs. So we looked at those web application options. We can is considering adding a boolean to include defaults or not, or alternatively there's a separate method called CreateEmptyBuilder on here. So we'd create, instead of CreateBuilder, we'd start with CreateEmptyBuilder. I read through this, and the reason why there's two proposed designs is that .NET now has tree shaking. So if you have a really small, if you have a kind of a large application that you're trying to Dockerize or even not Dockerize, and you want to make it as small as possible, you can enable tree shaking, and it will get rid of any code that you're not using and make your DLLs or .exe files smaller. And it turns out this method kind of doesn't really help with that, whereas this one does. This one is much more tree shakeable. So I don't know what it seems the first one is preferred. I'm not sure why. And if we look over here, you can see .NET 7 planning. So unfortunately, this feature doesn't look like it's going to be added to .NET 6. It's a .NET 7 thing. David Fowler did try to implement it and he found some issues. So not sure what those issues are. It sounds like we'll get this in .NET 7, at which point I think I can recommend, or at least at that point, I think I'd switch over to this new model and I'd use CreateEmptyBuilder. But for now, I think I'm just going to stick to the old generic HostBuilder with this with my with this HostBuilder that I'm newing up instead, and a startup class as well. So there we are. So potentially if you use this model here where you new up everything yourself, you're a lot more tree shakeable, as opposed to getting all these defaults plugged in for you. So it's always a pluses and minuses game. If you go with defaults, you're gonna get started quicker, but then you're gonna come a cropper, as they say over here in the UK. There's gonna be issues, and you're not gonna get the optimum settings, and maybe your application will be a little bit bigger if you do turn on tree shaking. So okay, so that's that. Briefly, just mention the when you go to create a new project now, add new project, API. There's this new checkbox. If you select .NET 6, use controllers. If you uncheck that, it uses minimal APIs. So what does that mean? So this is the new project with the minimal API. This is the new project with controllers, and you can see the controllers folder disappears in the minimal one. That makes sense, and you end up with a map get function instead that allows you to plug in some random code and make an endpoint at the root. So there we are. It's the .NET team have got what they wanted. They've got one file with a couple of lines of code, and they've got a project. Good for people who want really small, simple APIs, or newbies to .NET who are just learning and don't want too many concepts thrown at them all at once, which is fair enough. So that's the minimal APIs. Let's jump on to our next topic. If we go over to my mega thread, so I'm gonna just check that checkbox on minimal hosting because I've investigated it. I'm not gonna switch over to it just yet. I'm gonna wait for David Fowler's thread, who I haven't subscribed to yet, so just definitely going to check that out. It's issue number 32485 if anyone wants to look at that. Next, to look at HTTP 3 support. So before I look at that, I thought I'd look at HTTP 2 support, because HTTP 2 is, I think it came in .NET Core 2.2, but it was only really usable as a production thing in .NET Core 3 or 3.1, I think. That's when it was recommended for use. I think 2.2 was when it was preview. So if you want to enable HTTP 2, you only need, very simply, if I just go over here, we'll kind of collapse these ones. You only need to enable or create a new project with, we'll just create any old random project, .NET 6, why not? You need configure for HTTPS. We'll go with minimal APIs for now because I haven't played around with it that much. And you can see here, if we go into launch settings.json file, our application is configured to use TLS, HTTPS on 7172 in this particular case. So if I go here, and if I just go, okay, I'm just going to get rid of that and return this.request. How do you do this.request in this new brave world? Request. Is it in here? Context. I think this is how you do it. Context.request.protocol. So we'll just return that and we'll fire up this application. And notice that IIS Express is not the default when you start an application now. It's the Kestrel web server. So if I go there, the default is HTTP 2 if you're on HTTPS, because remember, HTTP 2 requires HTTPS. So I thought, okay, how do we add HTTP 3 support? And there's a new doc over here, use HTTP 3. If you go over to the ASP.NET Core 6 preview docs, and what did I see? HTTP 3 is available as a preview feature, so you shouldn't use it in production. So, okay, I'm not going to add it to any of my projects, but I thought I'd just continue investigating. It isn't finalized. It may have behavioral or performance issues. So yeah, definitely not a good idea to use this in production. And it also has certain requirements. So you need Windows 11 or Windows Server 2022. My understanding is that it contains some native code on those platforms that it uses. TLS 1.3 or later connection. So yeah, luckily I'm on Windows 11, as you can see. So I should be able to use this. Not supported on Mac OS as well. It is supported on Linux, but you have to have this package installed, it looks like. So getting started is seemed quite simple to me. Not enabled by default. Add configuration to Program.cs to enable HTTP 3. Simple. Configure Kestrel. Okay, this is the new web application. They've updated the docs to use the new web application. Minimal hosting API. So this is another reason why that new hosting API is going to be a better bet to use going forward, because all of the docs are going to show the new way of doing things, not going to show startup and the old generic host. So I think we need to switch at some point, but I'm going to wait for .NET 7 to do that. If we go back to our project, and if we come over here, we'll paste some code in, and we'll configure Kestrel. Here, we're listening on port 5001. And over here, it looks like the way to do it is to set protocols equals, check, what is this, enum? This enum is a bit odd. HTTP 1 and 2 and 3. Not sure why this is not a flagged enum. Oh, it is. Oh, you can set things individually. And this is probably just set to 1 and 2 and 3. 1, pipe 2, pipe 3. Cool. It's a shortcut way. But we already have HTTPS configured on this port. So what's going on? Well, you need to configure endpoint defaults is another way you can do this. So options.protocols equals HTTP 1 and 2 and 3. And then that way you don't need to open a new port. You can configure existing ports. So that should work. I tried this out. And I got this window. Seems like you need to unblock some more firewall stuff in Windows. That makes sense because HTTP 3 is UDP as opposed to TCP. And I got HTTP 2 and I thought, okay, what have I done wrong? And it turns out there was a line somewhere saying that HTTP 3 does not work over localhost. Here we go. Browsers do not enable HTTP 3 on localhost or loopback connections. To test with the browser, run the client and server on separate machines. For example, use a virtual machine, use Windows Subsystem for Linux or Windows Sandbox. So I thought, okay, that's fine. We can use Windows Subsystem for Linux. And the way we do that is we can add a section to our launch settings.json file, which looks a little bit like this. I have this in my .NET boxed template by default. I'm gonna just clean this up a little bit. So we get our URLs and we'll just plug them in here. And now we have our ports all sorted out, and I should have a WSL2 option in here. Why don't I see that? Oh, I was looking at the wrong thing. Silly me. Interesting that was already there. That was weird. Oh, it adds it for you. Interesting. Okay. Launch browser, true. What's different here? It's taken this launch URL. We don't want that anymore. It's just copied it across. So I had the configuration correct. We'll just use their one. I think I had WSL2. If you have just WSL, it won't add a duplicate. So I think I need to change the name in my templates to just be WSL and WSL production. So this is the same application running in the production hosting environment. Otherwise, this will, yeah, what happens if I undo that? No, I don't get that. I don't know how that works. It seems to want to add something here if you don't have this configured. Let's start that application now. And ASP.NET Core 6 is not installed. Hit OK. And I've got a couple of windows popping up over here. I haven't tried this before with .NET 6. Press any key to continue. Try running the application again. Once the script in the command window is completed, you may need to interact with the script. That didn't seem to work, did it? So it looks like it can't find this script. So that's in C program files, scripts. Install .NET preview.sh. That file does exist there. Okay, maybe I can just do this myself manually. So if I go to Ubuntu, I don't think I've run this before since I switched to Windows 11. And if we go to CD, we want to CD over to this directory, and that totally didn't work. ls, and we have our script over here. Can we do that? Come on, not found. That's odd. Open with Notepad 2. What is this doing? Ensure curl is installed. Make directory.net install. Why don't I just run these commands myself? So make directory. What's push D? Push D. Bash push D. I've not seen that command before. Oh, it stores the current directory in a stack. Last in, first out. Interesting. Okay. Good to know. And then we want to curl this thing. And that's just using this script over here. Install .NET Preview, install .NET Preview.sh. So that's just downloading that, and then we'll just sudo bash this guy. What was my password? Here we go. It's downloading. Download source. Not sure why that wasn't able to find the file. That's very strange. Yeah, the file's there. Install.net. Of course, Linux is a case sensitive, so I don't see any case differences. Weird. But the script was simple enough, we could run it ourselves. And then popd does the opposite of pushd. These are nice little commands to stick into my bash cheat sheet. So I have a bash cheat sheet over here. It's very comprehensive. And I don't think I have pushd and popd in here. So maybe I'll stick them in here somewhere. Moving files, navigating moving directories. Here we go. Oh, navigating directories. Here we go. That's where I can put that command.